Welcome to Watercolours with Caroline, our second week doing a Monet painting. This time it's Monet's painting of the Houses of Parliament in London on the River Thames, and we're going to try it in watercolour. Of course, Monet did his in oil. He did several of this building on the Thames in at different times of the day, different weather. And we're going to take the nice, bright, cheerful one in oranges and yellows and reds and make it a lovely silhouette against a gorgeous sky and the reflections in the water. So I think you need to really go 8 by 10 with this one, so you've got lots of space for the colours and the wet in wet. So draw your Parliament buildings and get your paper ready and we'll paint together. Here was the one I lost on the floor. This is the one I did on Wednesday. The other one's downstairs waiting to be framed. So there's a few places on here. Let's look at Monet's. There's a few places we want to leave a little bit of space for lilac. And let's zoom in. And we can't put the lilac on in the first wash because if it mixes with any of the yellow or the orange, it will make grey. So we need to leave a little bit of white space down here to put some lilac in with the second wash. Now he's got quite a bit down here and near these buildings, a little bit up here. And over in this corner, he has mostly blue, but I didn't bother with that blue over there. I left a bit of white there and I put lilac in because I felt that's just what I wanted to do. And so I left a bit of white here behind the building for some lilac. I didn't leave enough here, but you could leave a bit more than me. And this lilac was put over the top of the orange and the yellow. So if you put it over the top, it's not as likely to look as grey, but you can see up here over the yellow it is looking a bit grey. The other place we want to leave a bit of white is over here where he's sort of very smudgily, sort of put in the background of London in here, the buildings. He's just made it very, very indistinct with some very light blue. So we're going to use some cobalt blue in here, a little bit of the I put a little bit of ultramarine blue. I put a bit more shadow than he has in there just to pop that in. So those are things to think about as we do the first layer. And what we want to do is mix up all these colors before we start, before we wet. Two types of brush strokes. Wet in wet up here for this soft, soft blended sky. Then dry. Dry down here for these short, choppy brush strokes that he's used in the water. So we've got two different types of brush strokes. And we're working on dry down here, wet up here. So let's mix the colors up first. And it's basically whatever you have. What have you got in your palette? If you've got lemon, that's a great one. Let's get my brush. So I'm going to start with some lemon for the lightest yellow. If you don't have lemon, don't worry, just go with, I've got a very dirty brush. Just go with the light yellow if you don't have lemon. Mine's filthy. I'm going to clean mine up, setting up my camera. Right, my brush had lilac in, so I've just got to clean that up and start over. It was making grey before I started. When we clean up at the hall on a Wednesday, it's all very hectic and I don't always have time to do a thorough cleaning of my brushes. I sort of give them a quick swish and pack them away. And after I've got that lemon yellow, I'm going to use my Azo Yellow. Now you can use cadmium yellow, you can use Indian yellow, you can use Hansa yellow. Totally up to you, but I want some nice bright yellow for the sky. If you have Gamboge, which is an orange yellow, you can use Gamboge. If you don't, you can make one. I'll show you how to make it. So there's my Gamboge. It's a very orangey yellow, but if I wanted to make it, I'd take my bright Azo Yellow or cadmium yellow, and I'd add a little touch of Cadmium Red to it. And that will give you, if you look, almost exactly the same color. And you can adjust that with a little bit more red if you want to. And we're going to use that mix for the orange in the picture. So I'm going to do my bright yellow and my cadmium red and make a nice bright orange. I'll actually mix it with that one there that I was using. And we want a little bit of rose
for the pinky sky on the right. So some yellow and some Quinacridone Rose, or one of your colors that has rose in the title. Quinacridone Rose, Permanent Rose. I forget what the other rose is, but there's 3 good rose colors. And we have that over there. And I might have a little bit of rose all on its own. I'll just put it here on the side. A little bit of red all on its own, just here, just in case I want a touch of something. So let's get those colors ready before we start. Go back, get a bit more lemon. Got those all ready to go. I'll leave you a few minutes to get yours all ready to go. And I'm going to, while you're mixing yours up, I'm going to give... Okay, so I'm going to start wetting. I'm going to use my flat 3/4 inch brush so I can wet quickly and wet well. I'll zoom in a little bit. Going to wet the sky all the way down to where the Houses of Parliament meet the waterline. So just the sky and right over the buildings. I'm going to go right over them all the way down to where the waterline starts. So we're not going to wet the actual water. We're going to work on dry there. So back and forth, make sure we're going to do a lot of wet and wet here. So make sure it's good and wet. I'm going to go this way and that way. I'm going to lift it up and check. No spots missing, wet. Now it's safe to stop at the waterline because if any paint runs down there, it will run down to a good waterline where we're going to put the edge of the building. So that's fine. I'm going to just make sure that my tape has a little bit of mopping up so there's no backruns happening. And keep an eye on your paper as you're working. If you see a spot drying up too soon, add a bit of water quickly before it's too late. Too late would be when it had got too dry and you've got too much paint on. Oh, I'm ready to, I'm going to bring it down a little bit so you can see the top. And I'm going to switch to my number 10 brush. I want a fairly big brush because I don't want to fiddle with the sky. I want it to go on quite quickly. And we're going to start over on the left with the lemon yellow, the lightest yellow. And I'm going to make sure that when I get my brush in the lemon, I really roll it in the lemon, this big number 10 brush. I'm going to roll it in there and get it nice and full with the lemon paint. I'm even going to pick up a little bit more. And I'm going to start over on the left. Now, if you can avoid putting any paint on the buildings, that's great. But what you don't want is you don't want a white line between the building and the sky. You can come over the edge of the building just a little bit so that when you put your dark building in, there's no white line between your paint and your building. But leave most of the building unpainted. Do you understand what I mean? So we don't want to have a border, but we do want to leave most of the building unpainted. If you've got your mix of paint not too wet, if you've got your paper nice and wet, you should be able to put your paint on, look, and have it stay where you want it to stay. But I do want it to go just over the edge of the building. So that's my lemon. I want it to come down to the tip of the building and a little bit over onto the left here where I'm going to put the blue. Because if I put blue on top and I get a little bit of green blue, that's fine because he has a little bit of green blue in his paint. Just over the edge of the building here. I'm going to leave a lot of close to the building on the other side white because I want to put the lilac in the next wash. Now I'm going into my nice deep Azo Yellow, loading my brush again. I didn't wash it. Don't wash your brush. Do not wash your brush between picking up Colours, we're going from light to dark. Just roll your brush in the colour. I want a bit more yellow, and I'm going to go over now to the right hand side with some of this yellow, sweeping it across. His sort of goes across the paper in this left to right motion, so I'm sweeping mine across in a left to right motion. And I want to leave a little bit of white for the purple. And now, no washing the brush, but I'm going to roll it in the Gamboge, the orangey yellow. And I want to put a bit of orangey yellow wet in wet over here, down by the lower part of the building. And again, you can come over the edge just a little bit so that we've got a nice clean edge when we bring the dark paint in. And I want a lot more of the orange over this side. Leave a little bit of white for the purple. And up in the sky here. And then I'm going to go into my deeper orange. You can either use a cadmium orange or a red and yellow mix, rolling my brush in that. Did not wash my brush, no washing. And I'm going to put a bit more deeper orange in my sky. And if you made your sky wet enough, it should all still be mixing wet and wet. If it's not mixing wet and wet, grab a bit of water and wet it up a little bit. I want some deeper orange up here, a little bit going up into the sky here. And I'm just checking his picture. Now, at this point, I am going to wash and then dry my brush because I want to go into the rosy color, the rose and orange mix, and I want to just put on some deeper color over here. This will look lovely with the lilac when you put the lilac over here. Again, you can go over the edge of the building a little bit of rosy color. Doesn't matter if yours isn't exactly like his. And I have a few colors here. I have the rose and the orange mix, and the rose and a little bit of cadmium red. So I've got the rose and the orange mix here. Going to warm up these clouds a little bit. I've got my brush horizontal, and I'm not brushing. I'm not doing any brush work. I'm touching the wet surface of the paper with this brush and making those little brush marks that blend into the wet paint. A little bit of pink over here, just a little bit, tiny bit, and a little bit. We don't want to leave the left-hand side out completely, so I want to have a little touch of the rosy pink over here. And then go back to the right-hand side, and I'm going to grab a little bit of alizarin crimson. No washing of my brush here. Not alizarin crimson, I'm sorry, cadmium red. Beg your pardon, cadmium red. And I'm just going to add the lightest touch of cadmium red over here to really, really get that bright red in what I would assume is probably a sunset. I'm trying to think of what way he would be facing. I think he would be facing northeast looking at this, so I think this would be a sunset. It's hard to tell. I'd have to go really look at a map. So don't overdo it. I'm going to just pull back a little bit so you can see the whole thing. I've left some white for the lilac. This will lighten as it dries. I've left some white down here to put in a little bit of the cobalt in the next layer. A little bit of white down here to put in some lilac, so that can get left. And I'll let you catch up because we're going to work on dry down here to do the reflection in the water with a different style of brush stroke. I'll wash that brush out. And we'll go with a slightly smaller brush for the choppy brush strokes. And I need to get a bit more paint because I'm going to use the same colours. I'm going to use all of the same colours in the reflection, and I need a little bit more mixed up. So while you're catching up with me, I'm going to mix a little bit more of everything ready for the reflections. And they will be drying up on my palette a little bit, so I want to also add a little bit of water to, and I'm working on dry paper. I will need to add a little bit of water to everything as I'm working on dry paper. Gamboge, and then the yellow and red, nice orange. I couldn't put my protective paper over my painting because it would smear everything, so I've had to be just try and be careful. My yellow and orange, and then a little bit of pink, Quinacridone Rose or Permanent Rose, or I've forgotten the other rose that you could use because I never use it anymore, so I've forgotten what it's called. Got those ready for the reflections. And I'll grab Monet's. So there's not as much variation in the water, and when we do the choppy brush strokes in the water, we need to leave this mostly white for the reflection of the big tower of the building, and we need to leave quite a lot of white space close to the building where the reflection is dark, and all of these places. So when you're putting in the yellow, try and remember to leave some white space to put in your next color. If you don't, it doesn't matter. This is kind of a greeny blue, and we should be able to go right over the top with that greeny blue, and it should be okay. We can also add at the end of the painting, if you've got white space, you can, if it's dry, you can put yellow in at the end of the painting too, if your painting's dry, and fill up any white space. He also has in his one, he has showing through, he has like the red and the rose and everything. So if you've got a little bit of rose on your building, that's fine too, and it shows through. That will be absolutely fine. I've got a little bit of pink on mine, it will probably show through, so that's okay. That will be exactly like his painting. Right, I'm going to get now my number 6 brush, wet it up so it will take the paint, and again I'm going to start with the lemon, and I'm going to start over here on the left. I'll zoom in, and I'm going to do short horizontal brush strokes on dry paper, and I want to try and remember to leave a little bit of white to put the blue and the bluey green over in between and over the top. And they come right up to sort of this side of the building. I'm looking at his one, and I'm going to switch to the bright yellow and put a bit of the bright yellow in. And this part's going to take a little bit of time because you want to take your time to plan where your brush strokes are going, to get them in the right place and not forget the reflections coming down. There's the reflection of the building coming down here. You can have your brush strokes cutting into the reflection so that it's wavy. And I'm still in the bright yellow, but we're going to move to the orange. I'm going to get the Gamboge, the orangey yellow, the Gamboge, and make sure that wet and wet I can get the Gamboge to mix with some of the bright yellow. You don't have to get it all in at once. You can go back and add more. This is not like the wet and wet. You have a lot of control here. You can add more at the end. This just helps you find your way with the blue when we put the blue on. So take your time. I want to go into the very orange mix now. And up here close to the building, it's a very orangey colour. I want to add a little bit of that. I'll even go and get a little bit of rose on my brush, a little bit of rose. Add a little bit of rose into the mix. And over here. And now I am going to wash my brush because I've got quite a bit of rose on the brush. And I want to go back to the bright yellow. There's more yellow than blue, so in the waves. So you can put quite a bit on. Going to the Gamboge. As it comes forward towards you, it gets warmer, more orangey colours, more Gamboge. These paintings took him a long time, even though he was in London for a couple of years, I think. And what did I write? I did look it up. Different stays from 1899 to 1901. He went to a few different times, and he did quite a lot of paintings of the Houses of Parliament at different times of day, but he didn't finish them. He took them back to his studio in France, and he asked friends to send photographs to help him finish them up. He probably had enough information about colour to go on, but I think he wanted some accurate building information. So I'm going slowly across from left to right, starting with the bright yellows. There's a little sailing barge just right here. Well, they weren't little, they were actually quite big. And I want to go into the Gamboge again, the darker orange. And there is a reflection of the boat coming down. I want to get the deep orange, just here. Quite a bit of deep orange over here. And it's very possible that I'm leaving too much white. I'll fill it in later if I am. I definitely know I think I've got too much over here, so I'm going to go back with a little bit of lemon and put in a bit more colour over here, and then the little bit of Gamboge. Fill that up a little bit. And then as it comes across to the right hand side, there's a lot more blue and bluey green. Oh, and it's more orangey. So I'm going into my orange for over here. Of course, working with oil and all of his brush strokes, he would have gone over many times with the light yellows, the oranges. He'd mix. You can put a lot of paint on paint with oil. And as they took him a couple of years to finish, he would have spent a lot of time going back and forth on his colours. We don't have that luxury. We have to do it in one afternoon, wet in wet. And it's a little different for us. So I'm going into the Gamboge and the oranges over on this side, grabbing a little bit of the rosy orange that I made. Have some nice rosy orange in this corner, bit more. I'm whenever I wash my brush, because I want to go back to the light yellow, big blob of water, which is actually going to look rather nice, I think. Now I'm just about got, I think I've got enough. I'm thinking of where this is, this little bit here. I'm feeling like that's probably good. And put a little bit more light yellow in here. And then wash up. Pull back so you can see the whole painting. And I love the contrast of the choppy brushstrokes on dry and the lovely soft brushstrokes on wet. I think that's a really nice combination. So I'm going to let that soak in a little bit and you catch up, and then I'm going to use my hairdryer when that's soaked in to get this layer completely dry so that we can work on the next layer wet and wet again, but we've got to have this layer dry before we can go and do the next layer. Great, that is all dried up, and you'll need to, before you move on with the next layer, you will need to make sure yours is perfectly dry too. Okay, so let's mix up the lovely violet for the sky. If you're not ready, you can ask me again for the mixing directions. Very simple mix. My painting is dry, so I am going to protect it from my splashes. Pop that there. Then I can put my tray down, I don't have to worry. So we're going to use Cobalt Blue, a favourite of Monet's. Used a lot of Cobalt Blue. I'm going to put some Cobalt Blue here just on its own for the side of the building and a little bit of the sky. And with the first lot, I'm going to add a little bit of Quinacridone Rose until I get a lovely pinky, quite a pinky violet colour. So I added a couple of dabs of Quinacridone Rose. I'm going to take it over to this here, paint it on the side of my piece of paper, and make sure I've kind of matched the violet fairly accurately. There's some blue in his sky too, but we want it a nice warm, lovely warm violet. Adding just a little bit more rose, a little bit more blue. And this is just the straight Cobalt Blue here for the little bit at the side of the building and maybe a little bit in the sky. I'll wash my brush out now. You need to have, for wetting the sky again, you will need to have very, very clean water. Oh, I thought I'd got paint on there. I've got a bit of fluff on there. Go away. There we go. So we're going to wet exactly like the first time. We're going to wet down to the water line, the whole sky and the buildings and everything. I know it seems like a lot just for a few bits of violet, but if we don't, it's not going to blend in. It will sort of sit on the top. Last week, we had those clouds sitting on the top and we blended them in with water. That was a little bit different because we had some nice big white space for that, and we wanted to kind of make it look like a brush stroke. But this week we want it to just blend in. So I'm going to have to wet everything again. And that's why it needs to be perfectly dry. You can't wet it again unless it's perfectly dry. Otherwise you just disturb all the paint and lift it off. If it's perfectly dry, your paint won't lift off. It should stay there. And I'm going to go right down to the waterline. And then again, with my Kleenex, I'm just going to make sure I take off a little bit of the extra that's around the edge. Tip it and check. Yep, everywhere is wet. Zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start up here in the left-hand corner, my number 8 brush. I'm making slightly smaller clouds. I'm going to load up my number 8 brush with the nice violet colour. And even though Monet has quite a bit of blue in this corner, I want more violet than blue. So I'm just going to touch touch that brush in with a little bit of violet. Just a touch. Now, as he comes down closer to the buildings, there's a little bit more violet in there. I know I have a bit of yellow, but it should go over the top okay. It's just a very light yellow. Down here a little bit. A little bit here. Definitely there's some in here. And it doesn't matter if it goes over the edge of the building, that's fine. I'm going to move across the painting because there's quite a bit of violet down here by the base of the sky. And between these towers here, this over here is Big Ben. Some violet in there. And where it comes up against this pink, you're in safe territory because the violet and the pink share the Quinacridone Rose, so they will mix beautifully. A bit up here, a bit at the top of the sky. A little bit in here. And of course, where I put it over this little bit of orange up here, where I haven't left enough white, it will go a bit more grey. But because the orange is underneath, it won't be as grey as if it was going wet in wet. I'll wash my brush. And I'm going to get a little bit of Quinacridone Rose on my brush, which I didn't get ready because I forgot I might need it. So I'm just going to grab a little bit, and I want to have just a little bit more rose, just the tiniest bit of more rose, just mixing with some of that lilac colour, just a tiny bit. It's here and a little bit here. Very, very small amount. Now, the wetting process will have soaked in enough that if I get my Cobalt Blue and over here I stroke upwards with the Cobalt Blue, I'm going to get those very indistinct shadowy blue buildings on the side of the tower here. It's a little bit blue, blurry blue, and then there's a little bit of yellow, and then there's a little bit of blue close down to the water, kind of blurry. And we're going to put a little bit more blue in when we put the blue in the water, in the River Thames. And if I wanted to do a little bit of blue like Monet did up here in the sky, I could, at this point, touch in just the tiniest bit if I wanted to, because he's got a little bit there. And I'm going to use my wet brush here, and I'm just going to, went down into the dry paper here, so I'm just going to ease that in with a wet brush, just a little bit of easing before we put the dry paint on there. I'm just looking at his and deciding, do I need any more colour in the sky? And I'm seeing a big sort of white patch here. So I'm going to grab some of my orangey colour, and while my sky is still wet, I think I want to put a little bit more orange over here. So if on your second wetting, if you're finding that your sky is too pale, now it's dry, or you haven't put enough colour, you would like more colour, then when you wet it again, you can put more colour, and I'm going to put a little bit more over the other side too. So you decide. If you really are looking at it and thinking, boy, I should have put a bit more colour on the first time, second wetting, you can. That's fine. You can do a third, you can dry it and do a third layer if you feel you've gone too pale. and your paint will dry light. And I'm just going to pull back so you can see the whole thing. And of course I've left most of the building white, but I do want to go over all of these edges so that when I put the dark in, it won't have a white line along the edge. It will be seamless. And try not to paint your colours together. Try and let the water mix your colours together for you. See, I didn't do many brush strokes. It's literally a case of loading my brush with paint and touching the wet paper. There's no stroking, there's no painting, it's touching. And if you have enough paint and a big enough brush and enough water, you shouldn't need to do any stroking of the paint. You can see up here, I'm going to zoom in again, up here in the left corner, it's making its own soft cloud with no brush stroking, no painting needed. The paint is flowing into the water. It's going over the yellow, but because the yellow's dry, it's not making grey where it goes over the yellow. It's just making the soft edge to a cloud. This blue that I put in, just disappearing into the background. Sort of like his does. We can always put another layer if you want it a bit more distinct. So let your water do your work for you. Pull back a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Our next step is going to be filling in the dry area. So we don't need to dry the sky because we're going to work on the water again. Just check my notes, make sure I'm doing it all right. And then we'll mix up some bluey greens for the water reflections. Now, you have lots of choices. If you don't have Phthalo Green or you don't want to use Phthalo Green, you could use another green, or you could use Phthalo Blue, or you could just mix ultramarine and yellow to get a greeny watercolor. The reason I've included Phthalo Green in my mixes is when we do the buildings, we want to mix a very strong dark mix, and if I'm doing that, I like to use the transparent colors so we don't get muddy dark colors. And Phthalo Green is a really beautiful transparent color. We're going to mix some Quinacridone Rose in with it, another beautiful strong transparent color. So if you're mixing a lot of colors together to make a dark color, the more transparent colors you can add in there, the clearer your mix and you won't get mud. And then I don't like to introduce too many colors into a painting. I like it to be harmonious. So if I'm using that Phthalo Green for my dark mix, then I'm going to use it in the water, but it's not 100% necessary. It's just my choice for this painting. And just because I think he would have used an emerald green to mix up some of those greeny blue reflections, but Phthalo Blue would be okay. Some green with some blue mixed in would be okay. That's fine. So let's mix up the blues. Let's protect my work again. I'm not going to put it too close to the sky. And grab my blue palette here and put it around this way so you can see. Don't need to waste any of this paint that's on there. You can always use it. There's Cobalt Blue here, and even though my mix doesn't include Cobalt Blue, it's not going to affect anything to have it in there. So we're going to use some Ultramarine Blue, which is similar. I'm just going to mix my Ultramarine right on top of my Cobalt Blue so that I have some Ultramarine Blue there. And then I want some Ultramarine Blue with yellow to make a greeny blue. I'm going to put that right over the top of my purple. It's not going to affect anything. As long as I have enough there. And I want some Azo Yellow. And I'm going to make a greeny blue. Now, if that's all you have, you can use these two colors for your water. That's fine. But I kind of would like to have one. I'm going to use a clean one for this because I want a nice clear one. I'm going to have some Phthalo Green, if I can find it. There it is. I use Phthalo Green yellow shade, but if you use blue shade, you just can add a bit of yellow to it to change it. And with that, I'm going to have some Cobalt Blue with that, or you can use Ultramarine Blue, doesn't matter. I'm just trying to make a bluey green for the water, and a little bit of yellow with that too. Just lighten it up a little bit more Cobalt Blue. And then we've got some bluey greens for the water. Now they're not green greens in the water, they are bluey greens. And ultramarine blue as well. So move that out the way. And let's just have a look at Monet's. Now you can see that he has these lighter greens in the water, which is your ultramarine blue or your cobalt blue mixed with yellow, either one. I'm going to do some of the cobalt and yellow as well, just grabbing a bit right now. Cobalt is like ultramarine blue, except a little bit lighter, a little bit gentler, not as intense. So I've got some of those. And then he has some brighter greens, which is like the emerald green he probably used. And then over the top, he has these darker blues, which is your ultramarine mixed with your green, or your ultramarine mixed with indigo, or it doesn't really matter. Just darker shades of blue. So you can use ultramarine with some indigo, you can use ultramarine with some Prussian, you can use ultramarine with a little bit of Quinacridone Rose in it, so it's more purpley. Doesn't matter, just some different dark blues, because it gets darker as it goes over to this side, and the water gets darker as it's closer to the building here. The edge of the water back here goes higher than what we sort of see as the water line about here. Now I don't know if he was seeing that correctly, or if he just want to grab a. It's hard to see from the photo at the end here, because I thought the bank went all the way along with no breaks. But I guess there might be some kind of a break just here. It's hard to see from this photo, but we'll put it in as he has it. No worries. On dry paper, let's use my number 6 brush, a slightly smaller brush, and I want to start with the lighter greens. So it can be your cobalt and yellow, or your ultramarine with your cobalt with phthalo green. Can be either one, but let's start over this side, and you're going to fill in your white gaps. And if you feel like you've got too many white gaps and you don't want to fill them all in, you can fill them in with yellow when the green's dry. That's okay. Now I want to do a little bit of wet in wet over here. I want to get that lighter green here. This edge is interesting because it's hard to see what's going on. I want to put that lighter green with a bit of water in here. And I'm going to take the ultramarine just here, and he has a bit more color just over here. I'm just taking the ultramarine. I'm going to let it blend wet in wet into that green that I put there, and just have that extra little bit of background that he has at the side there. Just adding a little bit more blue. And I watered it down so it's not as distinct as the rest of the colour we're going to put in. And I'm going between, no washing my brush now. Sometimes I'm picking up the ultramarine blue. Sometimes I'm picking up the green. And sometimes I'm thinking, oh, I might need more yellow later, so I'm not going to put too much in. Going back to my green. And just filling in slowly. And it's at this point you realize you've probably left too much white space. That doesn't matter. Better you've got lots than not enough. And beware of putting too much blue in at this point. Don't obliterate all of your yellow, because this, if you look at his painting over here, there's a lot of yellow. You don't want to put too much dark in. You can even, if you want to, I'm going to grab some yellow. The green and the yellow will make an interesting wet in wet combination. If you feel that you want to do some wet in wet yellow and green, that works too. But don't go over all of your yellow. And then we've got the reflection to think about. The reflection is very dark. So I'm going to start with the lighter green, which is the cobalt and the yellow. And start with that. And I'm going to add over the top the darker green, which is the one that has the phthalo green. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. Mine's looking too phthalo, so I want to add some ultramarine blue to it. And then a bit more ultramarine blue. As I put it on, I realized I needed a little bit darker. And I want to have that mixing in with that light green that I put on there. And this first reflection doesn't come down that far. But there's no white light in the dark reflection close to the building. So make sure you join everything up, and make sure as you come to the base of the building you have a straight line, because when you put your building wash in, you want it to come at least to a straight line there. I'm going to grab that much darker blue. I put a little bit of rose into that to darken it up, and I'm going to add a little bit more dark in there. As it comes forward into the lighter colors, there's like little dabs of dark. Washing my brush because I want to get the lighter green, and come forward with a little bit of the lighter green here. Now, after this is dry, I went back and put a few more little dark spots on because I felt it needed more. So you don't have to put them all in at once if you're not sure. Better to use all your light colours first, and then later, if you feel you need a few darks, you know, there's a couple of darks over here and here. Pop them in when it's dry, or I can pop them in now if I'm thinking about it. Let's go back to the reflection. And I'm going back to the Nice dark ultramarine blue, green colour. And then switching to a little bit of lighter ultramarine blue, switching to a little bit of green, not washing my brush. And where the reflection comes out the side, it's choppy. Sometimes it comes out further, sometimes it doesn't. Go right over the top of your boat. Grab some blue. And grab a bit more blue here. There's reflections from the boat. Grab a little bit of green. Now this one from the big tower here, I think it's called St. Mary's Tower. And then that comes out. It's just a very strong reflection from the tower. We want to make sure we bring it out far enough. I'm going to grab a bit more of that dark blue. And of course you can go over the top. With these dark colours you can go over the top of your yellow or orange. It'll be fine. I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to do a little bit of thirsty brush and I just want to lighten up a little bit of this and put dark over the top. I'm just lifting a little from here. Going back into my light green. I want to mix a little bit more light green. I want to mix a little bit more yellow and blue. And I'm on dry paper, so I don't have to worry too much. What I do want to worry about is over here on my reflection. When I'm stopping, I want to stop in a horizontal motion. So when I start again, I don't want a straight line there when I start back with the reflection. I'm going to grab my bigger brush and grab my number 8 brush and my darker blue. And I can go, before it dries too much, I'm getting some dark blue, some green. I want to get that in a bit more. I'm going to grab some green. And before any of that dries up too much, I want to get a little bit more of that solid reflection in there. Grab some ultramarine blue. Do not stick to one color. I've got all these blues and greens available, and I'm grabbing a bit of one, a bit of the other, most of the time not washing my brush, so that I have plenty of colors to use and pick up on my brush. The nice thing is if you go over some of the oranges with your blue, it will make it darker. Won't have any detrimental effect except to give you a nice dark blue there. I'm starting off a lot of these places with the lighter green and then going to the darker color. Especially as you come closer to the viewer, you want to get a bit lighter, a bit warmer, a bit more yellowy color. So dipping in, what I've done now is I have some yellow over here from my first wash, and I'm dipping my greeny blue brush in it without washing it. I'm picking up a bit more yellow so that I can have some of these closer brush strokes, a more yellowy green. I'm just dipping in the pure ultramarine blue now, not washing my brush. I'm just changing that lighter green to a darker blue green just by picking up the ultramarine. And also pay attention to what these reflections represent. Some of them come down, you know, in the shape of the buildings a little bit. So you have to have a little bit of that shape reflected in your reflections. And over to the right here is a lot darker, so I will be adding more to that. As it starts to dry, I'll be adding some darker reflections there. As this side has a lot more dark blue, dark green. So I have his painting right in front of me so I can really look at where I'm putting these, adding a little bit more all the time. Where I have the wetter paint, it's going to look darker just because it's wet. And there's the sail of the boat there, so I want to have a little bit of dark from that. But you can see how easy it is to lose your nice bright yellows and oranges if you over paint. I'm just going to pull back so you can see the whole thing. I'm going to leave it at that for the moment because I know I can put some darker colours on once this is dry, and I will do, because once we've done the buildings, I want to have a bit more dark in the reflections. I know they'll dry quite a bit lighter. So what I have been curious about is what was the blurry bit towards the left of the building there. And it looks like now there is a big grove of trees there. Now, I don't know if that would have been there at the end of the building at the turn of the 20th century, like 1899. But there must have been something indistinct there. Oh, from the 19th century photo, I don't see trees, I just see buildings and docks along there. So that is probably what he was representing. Like an etching. Sorry, the light's there. The etching shows some very rough, broken down buildings. Very rough and broken down, where there are now trees and grass. So I guess it was the remains of the dockside. And all the dock buildings. In this old newspaper, it says the big tower was called the Grand Victoria Tower, which the Queen enters when she opens Parliament. So I don't know which one. I think St Mary's Tower was on the tower on the church. And of course, at this end is Big Ben. This one shows all of the barges and boats going up and down the Thames, which is, of course, is how everything arrived. All the supplies and the stuff from overseas and stuff from other places all arrived on those barges before big container ships and trucks and that kind of stuff. So it was very, very busy. All right, how are we doing? Are you all busy? Are we ready to mix the nice deep colours for the Houses of Parliament? We're going to need to make a lot of paint because you're going to need to paint them nice and deep and wet paint so you don't get streaks, and you know, all in one go so that you don't see too many brush strokes. Now it doesn't matter, you know, his is, no, that's not his, that's mine. Let's grab his. Now you can see a lot of his brush strokes, so if yours ends up looking like this, it's fine, that's okay. But because we're doing it in watercolor, it is kind of nice to kind of get it all on without too many brush strokes. So let's mix up your colors first. So you've got nice big puddles of colors. Where's my paper towel? Let's pop that over to stop me making a big mess. And let's grab my palette. Now, we can use the palette that we've just used. We can use all those colors that we've just mixed up. We just need to mix them up a lot deeper and darker than the first ones. Oh, I've lost my notes again. I'm having a bad day today for keeping track of anything that's useful. I'll have to do it from memory, won't I? Okay, let's get the Phthalo Green, because I want to have a nice transparent dark color for the buildings. I want lots of Phthalo Green and Ultramarine Blue. Now, Ultramarine Blue is not as transparent and it is granulating, but it'll give us some nice depth of color. So if we use some transparent colors for the other colors, that will be helpful. And now some Quinacridone Rose. And a little bit more green, because the green and the rose are going to make a really nice transparent dark color. And let's test that on a bit of paper. Okay. So that's nice. I'm going to add a bit more rose to that. Get a purpley dark. Looks pretty dark. And then we want some ultramarine blue just by itself. We can grab some of that from time to time to change the color up a little bit. I'm very interested in what else I wrote down because I can't remember. Oh, here. Oh, here's some notes. Look, there they are. Okay, that's it. You need some ultramarine blue. Ultramarine Blue and Quinacridone Rose so that we have a deep, nice deep purple. And somebody asked me if they could use dioxazine purple. I said, yeah, of course you can if you want to. I just tend to use all the same colors in one painting all of the time. So you've got the Ultramarine Blue and the Quinacridone Rose. It makes a lovely, so we've got this lovely deep violet color, the really deep green, the Ultramarine Blue. What we want is all of these colors mixing wet in wet as you paint them. And I've also used Ultramarine Blue, Phthalo Green and Azo Yellow to make a sort of a greenish color. So I'm going to do that one as well. I want lots of paint, so I'm mixing up lots of colors so we don't have just one boring color going across, and we don't want to run out of paint. So Ultramarine Blue, Phthalo Green, and then a bit of yellow to make a deep green. And a bit more blue. Don't want it too light. I'm going to add a little bit more Phthalo Green to this one. I'm going to add a bit more Ultramarine Blue to this one because I do not want to run out of color. I've got all those lovely dark, intense, transparent colors. And the only one that's not very transparent is the Ultramarine Blue, but it's intense. Cobalt Blue is pretty much the same, but it's not very intense. It's good for the gentler colors. So let's have all those ready to go. Oh, see, I did splash. Good thing I had that there. And I want two brushes to do this. I want my number 8 brush because it's, it's not that big an amount of building. And I'm going to have my number 2 brush for the little tiny towers at the top. Let's zoom in. And I'm going to dip in each color without cleaning my brush, without worrying about anything. I'm starting with Ultramarine Blue on my brush. I've rolled and rolled and rolled that number 8 brush in Ultramarine Blue. I'm going to roll the little number 2 brush in the very dark Phthalo Green and Rose and Ultramarine mixture. So I've got 2 different colors on 2 different brushes. And I'm going to start, of course, over on the left here. And I'm going to make sure as I paint that these colors are nice and intense. I'm going to come down the side of this building with that Ultramarine Blue and meet my waterline. Doesn't matter that it's going to be a different color because I'm going to connect them later. Now I've got that greeny color on my number 2 brush. So I'm going to put those little tower tops on, and I'm going to bring that down into the Ultramarine Blue. So I've got a wet in wet blending of those 2 colors. I can't paint the whole thing with the number 2 brush because it will run out of paint. I just want to get those tops in. Now, without washing my brush, I'm going to dip it into the dark green mix and continue on. I did not wash it. And I want to make sure it's always wet, always loaded with paint. I'm going to dip into the purpley color, not washing. And I'm going to dip my little brush into the purpley color and do some of these tops of the towers here. Your paint should be runny enough that it just flows all of the time, flows, and that it's wet, wet, wet. But it needs to also be dark, dark, dark. I'm going to dip back into the blue, no washing. What we get is an excitement of colors all mixing wet and wet. Never knowing when they're going to change into the into the green, going into the greeny colour. I think it's time to go back into the ultramarine blue. If you want to get a nice straight line, lay your brush down and pull towards you carefully, but don't push too hard on your brush or your brush will run out of paint and then you'll get brush marks. And back into the really, really dark green. And to get that nice straight edge. I'm going to go into the purple colour with my little tiny number 2 brush and get tops of the tower on here. Back into the ultramarine blue now. I'm changing to ultramarine blue. You don't have to do the colour I'm doing. I just want to reiterate that I am never picking up the same colour twice. There is actually, he hasn't put a flag on top of the tower, but I kind of want to because it's always there as long as the monarch is alive. On the side of the tower. If you find that straight size difficult, maybe use a flat brush if that's helpful to you. I have my little finger on the paper to rest it so I have a little bit of stability. Now I'm dipping into my paint frequently so that it's always really, really wet. I went from purple to blue to green. And only the tops are done with the little brush. Back to the green. And get some ultramarine blue. Back to the purple. Back to the green. Now I'm waiting a little bit to do the tops of those towers. I want to get some of this in here quickly, and then I'll come back to do the tops, grabbing some. I think there's a little flag here too. I'm actually adding a couple of flags where I think he's sort of maybe shown them. If at any time your paint gets too dried out, just add a little bit of water to it, but not on the paper, in your palette. And this is why you need to mix a lot to start with. If you need to stop and mix some up along the way, if you haven't got enough, be quick about it. Try and do a really quick grabbing of paint. Coming up to the end here, and I've got a few little places to do with the small brush, but I want to get to the end of the buildings before I go to the little brush. Luckily my big brush has got quite a good point on it, so I can get there quite easily. Right, and then this building here is Big Ben and the bell tower. We're going up here, going with some green, now some blue. Oh, I'm pretty sure when I looked at the modern photographs was a bit of a flag there. Oh, I missed a little tower here. Sometimes it helps know what you're painting. Other times it helps not to, because you can just do what he did and have that impressionistic look. Now, I don't want a straight line where my building meets the water, so I'm going to take these colours that I have on my small number 2 brush, and I'm going to start connecting the base with the reflection by putting in more little horizontal lines. And if I do it while it's still wet, it will be much more natural. And you can see how much my dark reflections have dried much lighter. So it's great to be able to go over the top with a bit more dark colour or intense colour. Grab a bit more ultramarine blue. They're quite blue over this side, so I'm going with just ultramarine blue over this side. This is my mix right here, so I'm using the stronger mix that's gone down into the well. And grabbing a little bit of purple. Some of the very, very dark green. There's some quite dark patches here. I think there's even, he's probably bunged in a few dark patches to represent boats. I'm not really sure. I know that the one that we have drawn in is definitely, he's representing a sailing barge, but I'm not sure what some of the other blobs are that he's put in there. I'm using mostly ultramarine for these darker reflections. And you'll notice sometimes I'm connecting my lines a bit so that they're not so disjointed. And sometimes I have smaller lines. Closer to the building is much darker, so I don't want them so disconnected. And my buildings look quite patchy because of, partly because of the light and partly because it's still wet. So the wet parts are reflecting the light, making them look lighter, and they are not dry yet, so they're looking quite light. But once they're dry and not reflecting light, they will look quite a bit darker. So the only thing left for mine now is to wait for that part in the water to dry a little bit and put the little sailing barge in. Or if at this point you felt you didn't have enough yellow, I'm going to use my really clean water and my really, really clean yellow, very clean brush. So if I felt that I didn't have enough yellow at this point, I can go in with some yellow and I can just wash over some of this if it's dry, and I can just put a bit more yellow in there if I want to. I'm going to get a little bit of the rosy color, just add a little bit of that, a little bit more color, just to connect everything a little bit more. A little bit of Gamboge. I can't do too much because I will lift too much of the blue and green, but just a tiny bit. This is still a little wet, but I will connect some of this with a little bit more yellow and orange, just to give it more connectedness. Because he, of course, will have blended his oil paints and blended them on top of each other and blended them again, so it will look a lot more blended. And when I put the little sailing barge in, I'll probably use the very, very dark green and rose and ultramarine, and I'll add some Payne's grey to that. You could add Payne's grey or you could add sepia to that. A bit more blue. Just, and much, much less water. Even a little bit of cadmium red is great for making a dark colour too. Grab a bit of cadmium red. You don't have to put all of these in. I'm just kind of showing you how all of these colours will really make a nice dark colour. Cadmium red with phthalo green, lovely dark colour. Now I can go over those colours again in a minute. And on the video I've started actually typing the colours in, so you've got some help for those. So what we're looking at here on the Thames is the old sailing barges that used to bring all the goods and supplies into the port. If they were in full sail, they would look like this. If they were at half sail, they would look like this. So he's got one that looks like it's about at half sail. Very indistinct. It's very hard to pick out exactly what he's painted there. And unless you know what it is, you might wonder. So he's really just done a bit of a blob for the sail and a bit of a blob for the boat. And I think there's another one here as well. But like I said, the Thames would have been full of these coming up to the docks with unloading all of their goods and supplies. So I painted over quite a bit of mine, but I can still just see my pencil marks. What I don't have is I've just got this in my hand so I can refer to it and make sure I just get it. So he's sort of done the sail, this kind of diamondy shape. Very minimal detail. There's the bow of the boat facing this way. There's a bit of a reflection in the water coming down like this. And stern of the boat here. And a little bit of reflection here of the boat. And then I think there was probably another little boat back here somewhere. I'm not really sure. I'm going to put a little splodge in. Kind of nice to just have something there. Oh, I've put my paper down on my wet wash there and lifted it up. Isn't that lovely? Let's see if I can. I don't know if I can fix that at this point, but let's have a go. Not the ideal time to put extra paint in, but let's give it a go. Nice thing is his is quite bitty, so just, oops. The more you paint, the more paint you take off. You do have to be a little bit careful when you're fixing up. I think I've fixed that corner. Disaster averted. Yeah, I think it's nice to have that little bit of a focal point with the boat on the water and possibly another one here. Just otherwise it's kind of chopped into two, well, three actually: water, sky, building. It's kind of nice to have one more extra thing, and sort of shows that maybe it's a river too. I do think, well, I've got my paintbrushes here. I do think my reflection could come out a bit more for this tower. I think it's not directly under the tower enough. So I'm going to grab a bit of each dark color and I'm going to take it out a little bit further. And just close up that bit of a gap there. And again, anywhere my paint is wet, it will look darker to you with the light shining on it, but once it's all dried, it won't be that dark. It will settle down. There. I think mine can definitely do with no more fiddling about, and I can say that one's pretty much finished. But if it's dry tomorrow and I feel like it needs a few extra touches of dark or color, or I will put a little bit more to unify this area here with a little bit more yellow when it's all dry. I'll make that decision tomorrow when I have a look at it. But for now, I consider that. Let's get rid of my messy edges. I like seeing it without the messy edges. I put the masking tape on so that I've got a nice clean edge, and that gives me an edge for framing if I need it. And then I will cut the paper off of here, because it's impossible to, it's very difficult to tear this brown tape off without tearing your painting. So I cut mine off when it's dry. It's not dry yet, so I'm going to leave it. And there we go. I'll stop.
I hope you enjoyed using all of those beautiful bright colors. And how did your silhouette go? That's the hardest part, I think, getting those dark colors down without too many brush strokes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Join me again next week when we're going to do a Winslow Homer. Bye for now.